Hey guys, Chris here. In today's video, we're going to talk about how Saab failed. And as in my previous videos, I'm not an expert. I've done some research for this video, but I knew a lot less about Saab than I thought I knew before, diving into researching for this video. These are, at the end of the day, just my opinions. I do and will probably make mistakes in this video. And Saab has a very interesting history. I'm not going to dive too deep into Saab's history, but I want to give you some history for context. So Saab was founded in 1948 as Svenska Aeroplan AB, AB standing for Aktiebolag, Swedish airplanes company in short, and translated into English. So Svenska Aeroplan Aktiebolag, SAAB. And from 1948 to 1969, Saab were making small and quirky cars, mostly for the domestic Swedish market. After World War II, there was demand for cars, and Saab made small, quirky cars that would work for Sweden. In 1969, Saab merged with Scania Vabis AB, a commercial vehicle manufacturer, or known as the truck maker Scania today, into the Saab Scania company under the Wallenberg family, a Swedish investor company. And then through the 60s and 70s and 80s, they introduced the Saab 900 in 1978, which really, put Saab on the map for the vehicles they were known for. And the 900 was a popular, very good looking. Today it looks really nice in my opinion. If you see a restored or a pristine version of early Saab 900s, they'll really catch your attention. They were also known for safety, good ride handling, and reliability. And the Saab 900 was a very popular car. It came in a 3-door hatchback, a 5-door hatchback, a saloon, and the very, very pretty and cool convertible version. And this really put Saab on the map through the 70s and 80s, put Saab on the map as making cool cars. Saabs were cool. They were the quirky Swedish automaker from Sweden, but who made cool cars. And then they had, performance variants of the cars with turbo badges. You had the Turbo 16 with 175 horsepower. You had the Aero versions, or the Aero versions, how you want to pronounce that. So some were making really cool cars. And in the 80s, they were really an up-and-coming brand. And then they also came out with the Saab 9000 in the 80s, which shared a platform with the Alfa 164, and also the Fiat Croma and Lancia Thema. A pretty vehicle, but in my opinion, that car looked too much like its competition. But, well, it filled the large car need if you wanted a large Saab. But in my opinion, what really, put Saab on the map was the 900. So, and then we move into the era of 1989 to year 2000, where GM purchased 50% of Saab, and the rest of the 50% of Saab was owned by Investor AB, which was a subsidiary or under the Wallenberg company as an investment company. And Saab started platform sharing. So in 1994, the second generation, or the new generation, Saab 900 came out. It was heavily based on the Opel Vectra, shared the same platform as the Opel Vectra, but it was heavily modified. So the story I've heard is that Saab were given the Opel Vectra platform, and then they were told to stay within a budget and to make such and such changes. But when the GM investment people, or the GM corporate people, came to Trollhättan in Sweden after a few years of development, well, Saab had changed so many things that the platform was barely recognizable, meaning that the car was very expensive to develop and very expensive to build. Saab basically said, we want to build this car, we're not going to build a car. So they were forced to build the Saab 900 the way Saab wanted to. But the second generation of the Saab 900, or the new generation as it's called, as I said previously, was a more bland, still a pretty and good looking car, especially the convertible in my opinion, but it was more bland and it was apparent that it was parts sharing with GM. And, you know, in a day and age where manufacturers were moving away from platform sharing, like the Audi A4 B5 and the Volkswagen Passat B5, which shared their last common platform from 1994 till 2002. That was the last time a car bigger than the Audi A4 shared a platform with a Volkswagen product. And Volkswagen were making really good products at the time. Opel, the Vectra, was a very bland and boring car and got very, you know, mediocre reviews. A very famous review is from Jeremy Clarkson, where he just sat and looked at the car and refused to review it because he said, well, the designers refused to style the car and give it any style, so I'm going to refuse to review it. So the Opel Vectra from inception almost had a very bad stigma attached to it, along with GM having, you know, its stigma of its own. Didn't help Saab, you know, an aspiring luxury brand making sporty, quirky, good-looking European cars. It didn't help them in that market, but sales were still strong, and sales grew into the 2000s. But this was where you could say Saab were really starting to move away from, well, what made Saab Saab. And then in 1997 we got the Saab 97. The 900 changed names to 93 in 1997, or the 1998 model year, 1999 model year for 1998. And in 1997 we got the Saab 97 with their new naming scheme. The Saab 97, in my opinion, a very good looking car. The saloon version's really good looking. The Estate is also very good looking. But in an age where the Germans were really upping up their perceived quality, you had the Audi A6 with its sleek German precision engineering. You had the BMW 5 Series with beautiful materials, and even the E-Class, even if it's considered a subpar Mercedes of the 1990s, it still has a much better and better built, nicer and better built interior than the Saab 97 which came out in 1997. So they weren't really making the cars at the level that they should be making the cars. But again, sales were, these were good times in the world, in Europe and in the US and around the world. They were good times, so Saab were selling vehicles. And then we have the GM era from 2000 till 2010. So in 2010, GM purchased the rest of the 50% of the Saab company from investor Abe. And now they owned the whole company. It was a wholly owned subsidiary of GM at this point. So in 2002, we have the third generation, or the second generation 9.3. And this is a car that, in my opinion, was still good looking. Saab's, you know, throughout their history made good looking cars, but it wasn't as good looking as the 900 before it, or the 900 before that, known as the 900 Classic. They were really losing their way, in my opinion, and also the interiors were, you know, it was still modernized from the previous generation 900, 9.3, but it was nothing like the Germans. You have to remember, at this time, the Audi had the B5 Audi A4, which just, you know, moved the bar even further. In 2004, we got the E90 BMW 3 Series, which also just had a beautiful interior, and also, even though having crisp bangle exterior styling, looked very good. And then we had the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, the W203, which looked like a mini S-Class. This was when Mercedes were upping up their quality from the 90s and moving into, you know, better materials. Pre-facelift versions of the, you know, the W203 aren't the best built vehicles, but post-facelift cars are really up to Mercedes standard. But compared to, you know, the 9.3, they were heads ahead, you know, heads above the Saab 9.3. And in my opinion, this is where, you know, platform sharing, GM's stigma also through the 2000s, and also it being, you know, similar, sharing this the third generation of the Opel Vectra platform. And the third generation Opel Vectra was even more boring and more bland than the second generation, in my opinion. The first generation was the best looking car in the Saab line, the Opel Vectra lineup, in my opinion. And then we didn't get a replacement for the 9.7 before 2010. And we can talk about the 9.7X, the SUV, and we can also talk about the 9.4X. But well, the 9.7X is a Chevrolet Tahoe wearing Saab makeup. In my opinion, it's not even worth talking about the car. And then you have the 9.2X, which was a Subaru Impreza wearing also Saab makeup. GM were making some strange decisions. They wanted to hop on the SUV craze as well. You can't blame them for that, but you know, it was a half-ass effort with just a badge engineered Chevrolet Tahoe. And Chevy and Saab being having two very different values in both styling and brand appeal. It's a disaster. I'm probably going to make a whole separate video on that car. But through the 2000s, Saab were, you know, still selling cars. And then we have in 2006, which was actually their best sales year, 89,000 sold vehicles. So for being a small car manufacturer, 89,000 vehicles isn't that bad. But then we had the financial crisis of 2008, and we had an all-time low year in 2010 with 21,000 sold vehicles. So 1/4 of the sales, Saab lost 3/4 of the sales in just 4 years. And that's worse than any of the car manufacturers I've covered thus far. I've covered Cadillac, which, you know, halved their sales from the top in the 2000s, and also Volvo, which lost, you know, maybe not even 50%, but 30% of its sales. 75% of its sales gone in 3 or 4 years. It was really a testament to that the Saab products that GM were putting out weren't as good as they should be. They weren't appealing to customers because other car manufacturers, thus losing sales, wasn't losing sales at the rate that Saab were losing sales. It's just amazing. I mean, 21,000 sales, more than 75% lost in 4 years. That is crazy, guys. 2010, 2009, we got the second generation 9.7 with which, well, still based on the GM Epsilon platform shared with this, you know, the Chevrolet Malibu. Too little, too late. A really good looking car. The interior was even nice looking, but compared to the Germans, again, it wasn't, it was subpar. It just didn't have the luxurious feel. It didn't have luxurious styling. It didn't have the materials, the quality of materials. It just was Saab, no pun intended, subpar, not Saab-par. And in my opinion, why Saab failed is much of the reason is why Cadillac failed under the 2000s, under GM ownership. Saab really had some unique, quirky products like the 900 series, which was by far their best-selling car of any of their products. And Saab just diluted the badge. They weren't making the cars as good as they could. And, well, is it because of GM ownership? Is it because they had their hands tied to a platform and they were limited and they were doing the best with what they had? And being tied and being bound by a platform, did that mean that, you know, the changes and the things they wanted to implement would become too expensive to ever make these cars much profitable? Well, I don't know. Will we know? Probably not, but I think the stigma connected to GM in 2000s is one of the main reasons why Saab failed and how GM was run. Because you must remember that pre-2008, we had Saab, we had Saturn, we had Pontiac, and we had a very healthy, can be discussed, we had a Cadillac selling tons of cars. And we also had Oldsmobile. GM had so many sub-brands that they were just badge engineering. And, well, when people had to choose and people stopped buying cars, they stopped buying the shitty cars. And Saab went from making really cool and pretty cars in especially the 70s and 80s. 80s was the golden era of Saab. Those 900s and also the 9000 of the 80s were really pretty and distinct car. Putting them next to a GM product, well, they weren't sharing GM platforms for one, but it was just worlds apart from a GM car. And then we have the Saab 97 in 2010, which just is so far behind the Germans at this point. Well, it was too little too late. So that's my opinion. That's why I think Saab failed. And, well, Saab was bought by Spyker, a Dutch car company. They also filed for bankruptcy, and now Saab is owned was bought by a Chinese car manufacturer and are now building cars under the Nevs brand. But the Saab brand isn't being used. I really hope that Saab can make a comeback. I think the right company could make Saab into making great cars again because, well, great design. They're cool, you know, aeroplane heritage and selling points, well, are really cool. So, guys, do you agree? I'm sorry. Do you agree with me? Do you think there are other reasons why Saab failed? If you do, please let me know in the comments down below. Please discuss with me. That would be really cool. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And for more car videos, please subscribe. See you guys later and goodbye.